page 11, pointed out in Jefferson's defense that the future president, in his very introduction to the Declaration of Independence, declared all men equal and implores a divine providence, a clear indication of where Nones's own priorities lay. 19. Isaac Leeser, the most important Jewish religious leader of the pre-Civil War period, stood much closer to the radical Jeffersonian view. He repeatedly invoked the principle of church-state separation in defense of Jewish rights, took an active role in the battle for Jewish equality on the state level, and was vigilant in his opposition to such alleged Christian intrusions into American public life as Sunday closing laws, Christian pronouncements in Thanksgiving proclamations, official references to Christianity in state and federal laws, and Christian prayers and Bible readings in the public schools. Even Leeser, however, was primarily motivated by a desire to assure Jews equal rights and to prevent their assimilation into the mainstream. While he was more wary of religious intrusions into public life than were some of his Jewish contemporaries, he did not literally advocate a secular government, much less an atheistic one. 20. It was then only in the post-Civil War era, with the revival of efforts to create a Christian America and the resulting ties between Jews and advocates of religious radicalism and free thought themselves on the rise during this period, that American Jews began unequivocally to speak out for a government free of any religious influence. Leading Jews participated in such groups as the Free Religious Association and the National Liberal League, and many Jews, among them such notable Reform. Page 12. Jewish leaders as Rabbis Isaac Mayer Wise, Bernhard Felsenthal, and Max Schlesinger, as well as the Jewish lay leader Moritz Ellinger, came to embrace the separationist agenda, spelled out in such periodicals as The Index, edited by Francis Abbott. As Professor Benny Kraut has pointed out, during this period, the issue of church-state relations precipitated a natural, pragmatic alliance uniting Jews, liberal Christians, religious freethinkers, and secularists in common bond, their religious and theological differences notwithstanding. 21. The result, particularly in terms of Reform Jewish thought, was a clear shift away from emphasis on Americans as a religious people and toward greater stress on government as a secular institution. Thus, in 1869, Isaac Mayer Wise proclaimed that the state has no religion. Having no religion, it cannot impose any religious instruction on the citizen, adult, or child. 22. Bernhard Felsenthal, in an 1875 polemic written to prove that ours is not a Christian civilization, went even further. God be praised that church and state are separated in our country. God be praised that the Constitution of the United States and of the single states are now all freed from this danger-breeding idea. God be praised that they are atheistical, as they have been accused of being by some overzealous, dark warriors who desire to overcome the 19th century and to restore again the 14th century. God be praised that this has been accomplished in our Union, and may our constitutions and state institutions remain atheistical, just as our manufactories, our banks, page 13, and our commerce are. 23. This soon became the standard Jewish line on church and state. The Union of American Hebrew Congregations, founded in 1875, and not originally an organ of the Reform movement, devoted one of its first resolutions to an expression of support for the Congress of Liberals in its efforts to secularize the state completely. 24. The Central Conference of American Rabbis, the American Jewish Committee, and the American Jewish Congress expressed like support for strict separationism early in the 20th century. 25. Even as late as the early 1960s, a recent study indicates no significant deviation from this position was yet in evidence. American Jews under the leadership of their defense organizations went on record time after time in significant court cases on behalf of separation. For the most part, they eschewed completely the idea of equal government recognition of all religions or of non-denominational religious practices, and they called for non-recognition of any form of religion. 26. More recently, however, the coalition between Jews and secularists has come under increasing pressure. Beginning in the 1960s, Orthodox Jews abandoned their opposition to state aid to parochial schools in the hope of obtaining funds for their own day schools. They argued, as Catholics had before them, that education in a religious setting benefited not only members of their own faith, but also the nation as a whole, and that funds used to support secular studies at these schools should not be. Page 14. Denied just because the schools happened to teach religious subjects on the side. They also cast doubt on the whole Jewish separationist approach to the problem of church and state, terming it robot-like and unthinking. 27. Major Jewish organizations were actually not quite as committed to the secularist agenda on church and state as their opponents imagined. Taxation of church property, elimination of chaplains from the public payroll, opposition to the phrase "In God We Trust," and related efforts to outlaw all manifestations of religion in American life never found significant support in Jewish quarters, probably because they failed to comport with Jewish interests that were, in the final analysis, not totally secular at all. 28. But these rarely talked about exceptions did not alter the overall thrust of Jewish rhetoric on the matter of church and state, much less Jewish policy on most issues of contemporary concern. In insisting that significant policy changes should take place, Orthodox Jews, later joined by neoconservatives and others, argued that the whole alliance with strict separationists should be abandoned. They sought in its stead a new partnership with groups laboring to shape government policy in a pro-religion direction. They considered this a position better rooted in American Jewry's past than they realized, to be in the best interests of Jews and Judaism, and good for interfaith relations as well. Where major Jewish organizations in the 20th century feared erosion of the No Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, they stressed the need to champion free exercise of religion through laws and government programs designed to make it easier for observant Jews. Page 15. To uphold the tenets of their faith. To their mind, the threat posed by rampant secularism was far more imminent and serious than any residual threat from the forces of militant Christianity. For the breakdown of the 20th century American Jewish consensus on the subject of church and state should not be surprising. If anything, the fact that the consensus lasted as long as it did is surprising, for it effectively masked an agonizing dilemma on the question of religion and state that characterizes much of modern Jewish history. On the one hand, history teaches Jews to favor strict church-state separation as the only defense against a Christian-dominated state. Those who emphasize this reading of history think that sooner or later so-called non-denominational religious exercises inevitably acquire sectarian additions and deviations, and that non-denominational then becomes the majority's term for what the minority views as decidedly partisan. They fear that calls for religion in American life will, given the record of the past, likely turn into calls for a Christian America. To prevent this, they argue for a fence around the law so as to avoid approaches to transgression as well as actual transgression. They understandably worry that once religion gains entry into the public square, majority rule will come trampling down over minority rights, Christianizing everything in its path. 29. Page 16. On the other hand, history also teaches Jews to oppose secularization as a force leading to assimilation, social decay, and sometimes to persecution of all religions, Judaism included. Those who emphasize this reading of history welcome appropriate manifestations of religion in American life and propose a less absolutist approach to church-state separation, freedom for religion. They insist that support for religion is basic to the American system, and fear that completely divorcing religion from national life will result in a jungle where brute force, cunning, and unbridled passion rule supreme. Only the idea that wrongdoing is an offense against the divine authority and order, they argue, can protect society against delinquency and crime. They also point out that Jews, as a small and often persecuted minority, should be wary of setting themselves too far apart from the majority lest antisemitism result. 30. What then of Jews in unsecular America? They are caught between two positions, both of them historically legitimate, ideologically convincing, and fraught with dangers. Experience has taught Jews conflicting lessons, for those who have held aloft the banner of religion, and those who have trampled down upon it have, at different times, proved both friendly and unfriendly. Jews, as idealists, may seek to promote a utopian society in America, where they and their neighbors can live as equals, safe from the fire and brimstone of the Christian state and the desolate barrenness of the secular one. How best to realize such a society, however, remains an unsolved riddle. Page 17. Notes. 1. Morton Borden, Jews, Turks, and Infidels, Chapel Hill, 1984, pages 76 to 79. 2. Robert T. Handy, A Christian America, New York, 1971, page 8. 3. Joseph Story, Commentaries on the Constitution of the United States, Boston, 1833, 3 par. 1865 is quoted in Chester J. Antio and L. Freedom from Federal Establishment, Milwaukee, 1964, page 160, cf. Michael J. Malbin, Religion and Politics. The Intentions of the Authors of the First Amendment, Washington, D.C., 1978. 4. Shover v. The State, 5 ENG 259 as quoted in Bernard J. Meislin, Jewish Law in America, in Bernard S. Jackson, edition Jewish Law in Legal History and the Modern World, Leiden, 1980, page 159, cf. Borden, Jews, Turks, and Infidels, pages 97 to 129. 5. People v. Ruggles, 8 John's Republic, New York, 294, 1811. U.S. v. McIntosh, 283, U.S. 605, 1931. Rogers v. State, 60 Georgia Appeals Reports 722, cf. John Webb Pratt Religion, Politics and Diversity, Ithaca, New York, 1967, pages 138, 142. Leonard W. Levy, Treason Against God, New York, 1981, pages 334. Meislin, Jewish Law in America, page 159. 6. The Works of Daniel Webster, Boston, 1951, 6, pages 175, 166, 176. C.F. Anson P. Stokes and Leo Pfeffer, Church and State in the United States, Revolution Edition, New York, 1964, page 105. Borden, Jews, Turks, and Infidels, pages 102 to 103. 7. Ferenc Ems as Daniel Webster, Architect of America's Civil Religion, Historical New Hampshire 34, 1979, pages 223 to 243. Max J. Kohler, Daniel Webster and the Jews, Publications of the American Jewish Historical Society 11, 1903, pages 186 to 187. Page 18. B. Benjamin Franklin, Motion for Prayers in the Philadelphia Convention, in N.G. Goodman edition, A Benjamin Franklin Reader, New York, 1945, 242. Patrick Henry. And I Don't Care What It Is. The Tradition History of a Civil Religion Proof Text. The Journal of the American Academy of Religion 49, 1981, 41. C.F. Russell E. Ritchie and Donald G. Jones. Editions, American Civil Religion, New York, 1974. John F. Wilson, Public Religion in American Culture, Philadelphia, 1979. Martin Marty, A Sort of Republican Banquet. The Journal of Religion 59, October 1979, pages 383 to 405. 9. These documents are conveniently reprinted in Morris U. Schappa's A Documentary History of the Jews in the United States, 1654 to 1075, New York, 1971, 64, 68. 122, italics added. 10. Ibid, 279. C.F. Jonathan D. Sarna, Jacksonian Jew. The Two Worlds of Mordecai Noah, New York, 1981, 132 to 135. 11. Shlomit Yahalom, American Judaism and the Question of Separation Between Church and State. Ph.D., Hebrew University, 1981. English section, page 14. CF Hebrew section, page 260. 12. Bertram W. Korn, American Jewry and the Civil War, New York, 1970. Pages 56 to 97. 13. Naomi W. Cohen, Encounter with Emancipation, Philadelphia, 1984, page 77. 14. Ferenc Ems as Protestantism and the Search for Stability. Liberal and Conservative Quests for a Christian America, 1875 to 1925. In Jerry Israel edition, Building the Organizational Society, New York, 1972. Pages 88 to 102. Paul A. Carter, The Spiritual Crisis of the Gilded Age, DeKalb, Illinois, page 19. 1971. Jackson Lears, No Place of Grace, New York, 1981. 15. Handy, A Christian America, page 101. 16. American Protestant Theological Review 5, July 1867, pages 390 to 391. 17. Borden, Jews, Turks, and Infidels, pages 62 to 74. Cohen, Encounter with Emancipation, pages 254 to 256. 18. Quoted in Stokes, Church and State in the United States, 1964, pages 52 to 53. W. A. Blakely edition. American State Papers Bearing on Sunday Legislation, New York, 1891, page 57. 19. Edwin Wolfe II and Maxwell Whiteman, The History of the Jews of Philadelphia, From Colonial Times to the Age of Jackson, Philadelphia, 1975, 213. 20. Maxey S. Seller, Isaac Leeser, Architect of the American Jewish Community, Ph.D., University of Pennsylvania, 1965, 136 to 175. C.F. Isaac Leeser, The Claims of the Jews to an Equality of Rights, Philadelphia, 1841. 21. Benny Kraut, Francis E. Abbott, Perceptions of a 19th-Century Religious Radical on Jews and Judaism, in J.R. Marcus and A.J. Peck, Studies in the American Jewish Experience, Cincinnati, 1981, pages 99 to 101. 22. Quoted in James Heller, Isaac M. Wise, His Life, Work and Thought, New York, 1965, page 620. 23. Reprinted in W. Gunther Plott, The Growth of Reform Judaism, New York, 1965, pages 180 to 181. 24. The full text of this July 1876 resolution is reprinted in Where We Stand, Social Action Resolutions Adopted by the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, New York, 1960, page 14. 25. Eugene Lipman, The Conference Considers Relations, page 20, Between Religion and the State, in B. W. Korn edition, Retrospect and Prospect, New York, 1965, 114 to 128. Naomi W. Cohen, Not Free to Desist, A History of the American Jewish Committee, Philadelphia, 1972, 433 to 452. Leo Pfeffer, An Autobiographical Sketch, in James E. Wood, Jr. edition, Religion and the State, Waco, Texas, 1985, pages 487 to 533. 26. Naomi W. Cohen, Schools, Religion and Government Recent American Jewish Opinions, Michael 3, 1975, pages 343 to 344. C. F. Murray Friedman, The Utopian Dilemma, Washington, 1985, pages 28 to 31. 27. Marvin Schick quoted in Cohen, Schools, Religion and Government, page 377, cf. pages 366 to 369. 28. Yahalom, American Judaism and the Question of Separation Between Church and State, pages 17 to 28. 29. Quotes in Cohen, Schools, Religion and Government, pages 354, 345. 30. Alvin I. Schiff, The Jewish Day School in America, New York, 1966, page 177. Cohen, Schools, Religion and Government, page 364.